Security permissions, also called NTFS permissions because they are granted to us through the NTFS file system, are ways of allowing or denying people access to resources on our computer. These resources might be printers, files, folders. So let's try one out as a demonstration. I'm just going to open my File Explorer and this PC and then my C drive, and I have here a folder called Fred's Personnel Records. Let's take a look at the permissions we have right now. I'm going to go down to the Properties. I just right-clicked on it and click Properties, and then over to Security tab. So these are the security permissions. And you can see authenticated users can modify, but they don't have full control, so they can't change permissions. The system can, an administrator can, and users can only read and execute files that might be in that folder. Well, since it's called Fred's Personnel Records, and inside it has a file called Fire Fred. Fred will be terminated June 30th. I really don't want Fred to be able to access this thing. So I'm going to go back down to those permissions, Properties, Security, and I'm going to edit these, and I'm going to add Fred. Now I have a user named Fred on this system. I'm going to click Advanced and Find Now, and I'm going to go down here. These are groups that have the 2 people icons. The ones that have single icons are users. So I can do this to either groups or users, and the most common way is to put users into groups and then give those groups permissions. But in this case, I'm just going to add Fred to this. And now that I have Fred entered here, I will deny Fred any access to that thing. Now it says you are setting deny permission entry. Deny entries take precedence over allow entries. This means that if a user is a member of 2 groups, one that is allowed a permission and another that is denied the same permission, the user is denied that permission. Okay. All right, now that we have that set, let's switch over to Fred's account. Fred, and let's see what happens if Fred tries to access that folder. Here's Fred's personnel records, and Fred is denied access to that folder. So Fred is effectively locked out of that. And by the way, Fred is not an administrator, so this is asking if he wants to do something, then he needs administrative access. So he doesn't have that. So anyway, that is the security permissions. Now, some things that let's take a note of about these things. So let's go back here to this Properties and Security. And you must have, I'm on as Fred right now, and that will not do. I can't look at those as Fred for that. So I have to switch user back to Roger again. There we go. Now we can go back and look at that. There's the C drive, Fred's personnel records, go to Properties and Security. There we go. We have several levels here of access, and you may note, let's go back to Fred here for a minute and edit Fred. You may note that if I click one of these, everything below it turns on. So that's because these are in a hierarchy. So we can allow, well, special permissions gives us some very granular allows and denies, so we're not going to talk about those right now. But write access just allows the person to write to a file to modify that file. Read allows them just to read it. List folder contents, that does what it sounds like it does. Read and execute allows you to read files or folders and then to execute any executables in those files and folders. Modify is the lowest that you need to be able to delete a file or to create a file in that folder. And then full control allows you to change these permissions. Without full control, I would not be able to make these changes that I'm making right now. Now, there are several things that confound how these things work. For one thing, they are inherited. So, for example, these, when I create these, they will have the same permissions as the parent folder, in this case the C drive itself. If I were to create a folder underneath this, well, actually, let's go back first and set the, do I have Fred still denied? Yes, I still have Fred denied. So let's go back here inside and create another folder inside of it, new folder, test folder, and let's look at the permissions of that test folder. And we should find that Fred is denied access to that because it's inheriting the parent's permissions. Now, how these things interact can be very, very tricky. If two people, as you saw a little bit earlier in the warning, if a person is a member of two groups and they're denied by one group, explicitly denied by one group, then they would not have access to it. However, if they are implicitly denied, that is to say, I didn't click allow on anything, and if I don't click allow, then they are implicitly denied, and they're a member of two groups, then the one group that gives them permission would give them full permission, and they would not be denied. So there's a difference between explicit and implicit deny, and there's a hierarchy of how those things work together. There are also the problems of when you move a file or a folder. Does it become inherited into the new location that you put it, or does it not inherit? Well, it all depends on if it's on the same drive or a different drive. So there are lots and lots of confounding things here in permissions. Read over the notes that we have in that section this week, and I have the stuff that you really need to know for the MTA. Let's actually go to those notes for a minute and go down to security permissions. I have a list of those things that you should know for your MTA exam here in the notes. So walk through these things and understand them as best you can. Somewhere here I have here it is, explicit deny overrides explicit allow. That overrides inherited deny, that overrides inherited allow, and then there's such thing as ownership, and I didn't look at that. Let's take a look at ownership here. So I'm going to right click again, go to properties, security, and this time I'm going to go down to advanced, and you can see that I am the owner. Now, any administrator can change the owner to themselves, but otherwise it is the owner who has control over what permissions are allowed and what permissions are not allowed by various users.